Mr. Alexander Triantis, Dean, Robert Smith School of Business, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here amidst a distinguished gathering of business leaders, academia, policymakers, and investors. I would like to congratulate the Robert Smith School of Business on putting together today's deliberations on doing business with India, the promise and the perils. I would say that the promise refers to the future, the perils only refer to the past. The topic is timely. India's growth story amidst a slowing global economy is attracting worldwide attention. As a consequence, the new opportunities for doing business with India are being viewed with great interest by the global investor community. While the promise offered by India as a market and investment destination is unparalleled, there are at the same time challenges that must obviously be addressed for realizing the full potential. The landmark election of 2014, which brought Prime Minister Modi's government to power on an unprecedented mandate and for economic growth and development, followed by sweeping economic reforms undertaken by the government, with the objective of meeting the aspirations of the people and transforming India into an investor-friendly destination, is already beginning to pay dividends in the form of high GDP growth rates and increase of FDI flows into the country. According to figures released by the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion of the Government of India, FDI equity inflows recorded a 44% growth in the 21-month period since the new government came to power, from a figure of $43.8 billion in the preceding 21 months to $64 billion during this period. FDI into India touched the highest ever mark of $51 billion during the April to February period of 2015-16. According to a report by FT Intelligence, India emerged as the world's top destination for capital investment in 2015, thanks to a number of mega investments throughout the year. In the report, India comes out as the highest ranked country by greenfield capital investment, with $63 billion of FDI announced in 2015. This obviously reflects the confidence of investors in the macroeconomic policy framework and investment climate in the country. There is a significant improvement in the macroeconomic stability of the Indian economy in terms of low inflation levels, fiscal deficit, and current account deficit. The improvement in India's economic fundamentals has been accelerated by the combined impact of government reforms, RBI's inflation focus, and benign commodity prices. This outcome is creditable considering that the global economic situation continues to be uncertain, transmitting a negative spillover. The International Monetary Fund has identified India as a bright spot in the global economy, projected to grow at 7.5% in 2016. And the expectation in India is that in the coming year, the rate of growth should be higher, because in the previous 2 years, we grew at 7% and then 7.5%, and that was accompanied by a very poor monsoon. And this year, the expectation is that the monsoon would be normal, which would lead to increased rural income and increased rural demand, and therefore contribute to demand generation and growth in the coming period. Improved investor confidence, low oil prices, robust domestic demand, and vigorous policy reforms have all contributed to this extraordinary performance. Since assuming office, the Prime Minister has accorded top priority to building a state-of-the-art infrastructure, improving the ease of doing business, cutting red tape, promoting domestic manufacturing and skill development for job creation, encouraging financial inclusion. And in fact, if we just look at the figures for financial inclusion, in the past several months, 200 million new bank accounts have been created. And that enables the lower segments of society, lower income segments of society, to also start benefiting from the process of development. And in terms of some of the subsidies that have to be given, they will be given directly into these bank accounts, eliminating the leakages and the middlemen. Providing universal internet access and e-services, building smart cities, and changing the social security environment. Now, in terms of smart cities, as a start, we are looking at doing about 100 smart cities. As you know, today in India, about 350 million people live in urban areas. The projection is that in the next 15 years, there will be more than 600 million people in India living in urban areas. So you can visualize the need for building new urban infrastructure, housing, roads, power, transportation systems, communication, schools, hospitals. And we would like to do it to the maximum extent possible using the concept of smart cities to economize on the use of resources. And following some of the practices in the US, there was a competitive process through which the first 100 smart cities were identified. And from that 100, 5 have been identified for the first phase of funding under this program. As part of the target to improve India's ranking on the World Bank's ease of doing business, India moved up 12 places last year from 142 to 130. While critics may say it falls short, this is an important turnaround in the trend, which is bound to show further improvements in the coming years. And I'm confident that the figures, when released this year, would show even better performance. Considerable work is underway to streamline and simplify approval processes and expedite clearances for starting a business. Several applications are now online, and the number of days required for approvals has been cut dramatically. As a result, a company can now obtain various registrations through a single process, reducing cost and time. An e-biz portal has been established to provide an online single window to businesses for obtaining government services. 22 central government services have been integrated with this portal, and some state government services are also available through this portal. In December 2015, India's Parliament enacted the Commercial Courts, Commercial Division, and Commercial Appellate Division of High Courts Act 2015, which will set up special courts to speed up the resolution of commercial disputes, including intellectual property disputes. The states are now moving hand in hand with the federal government in a spirit of cooperative and competitive federalism to promote the ease of doing business in their respective states, with a view to attracting higher investments. A ranking of the states on the ease of doing business with the help of the World Bank has prompted the state governments into a healthy competition to ensure a business-friendly ecosystem. In addition, several trade facilitation measures are also being implemented to reduce documentation requirements for importing and exporting goods, online release of cargo, setting up of customs clearance facilitation committees for every port to ensure and monitor expeditious clearance of goods as per specific timelines. To promote FDI inflows, the government has raised FDI caps in several sectors like defense, railways, insurance, construction, and medical devices. A number of sectors have now been placed on the automatic route for investment. Government has opened up 100% FDI in construction, certain sectors of railway infrastructure, and medical devices. FDI in defense industry has been permitted through government route up to 49%, Higher FDI can be allowed on case-to-case basis if linked with state-of-the-art technology. 49% FDI is now permitted in insurance sector, in which 26% FDI will be through the automatic route and higher equity up to 49% through the government route. On 10th November 2015, the government announced further FDI-related reforms covering 15 major sectors of the economy, including limited liability partnerships, downstream investment, investment by companies owned and controlled by non-resident Indians, establishment and transfer of ownership and control of Indian companies, plantations, mining and mineral separation, broadcasting, civil aviation, among others. The remarkable pace and steady direction of the reforms indicate the strong commitment of the government to ensure that India's growth is built on strong fundamentals and is inclusive. Specific mechanisms have been created to address concerns of investors and provide them hand-holding services. An interministerial committee to fast-track investment proposals from the United States has been created under the chairmanship of the Secretary, Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, and involves representatives from 12 other ministries. This committee will identify bottlenecks faced by US investors and ensure that investment from USA are on a fast track. It will interact with US companies and relevant government and state-level officials to facilitate investments. A separate body, the Invest India, has been revitalized to provide hand-holding services to investors in general. With all these steps, we are hoping to attract investments in the priority sectors of infrastructure, such as railways, ports, highways, smart cities, renewable energy. Our estimate is that in the next 5 years, we will need about $1 trillion worth of investment in infrastructure. A certain amount of activity is already taking place. We are now building about 20 kilometers of highways every day. And the government wants to take that to a figure about 40 kilometers. Again, in the railway sector, huge modernization and infrastructure building efforts are underway. You may have seen reports of the government of Japan extending a loan to India of about $15 billion for a 50-year repayment period at 0.5% and with a 15-year initial period of non-repayment for building a bullet train line between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. Recognizing the opportunities that Make in India has opened up, several companies have promised to make substantial investments in India. And among the announced investments that have also appeared in the media, we have Foxconn indicating about $5 billion of new investment, General Motors about $2 billion of new investment, Ford an additional $1 billion of new investment, Uber about $1 billion, and General Electric has just won a contract which will involve their building a $2.6 billion facility in India to make 1,000 diesel locomotives. During the recently concluded Make in India Week, more than 190 companies pledged over $222 billion in new investments. The Digital India Initiative envisions bringing broadband connectivity to rural areas across India, and it seeks to increase e-governance by building electronic databases, creating digital workflows for ministries, and enabling environment to fill more forms and complaints online. In fact, I remember when I was serving in Israel, one of the figures I used to cite to sort of point out to people the opportunities that existed in India was that I used to say that, look, the population of Israel is 7 million. And at that time, we were adding 15 million new mobile phone subscribers in India every month. So that was the rate at which expansion was happening. So, and companies in Israel who are strong in products and technology, when they're looking at scaling up in the economic sense or engineering sense, clearly partnership with India for them would be useful. And we find that for many Israeli companies who are very strong in technology, their presence now in India is sometimes far bigger than their initial presence in Israel itself. And today, I was informed by one of the leading US companies that 5 million additional people are coming online in India every month. So that's the rate at which internet expansion is taking place. Google has committed to provide broadband connectivity at 500 railway stations in India. Microsoft has agreed to provide broadband connectivity to several 100,000 villages in India and make India its cloud hub through India data centers. Qualcomm has announced an investment of $150 million to support startups in India. And startups is again an area where we find a lot of energy. In the last 2 years, about $6 billion have flowed into startups in India, and several unicorns have emerged from India. The Smart Cities mission, as I mentioned, seeks to develop 100 Indian cities into smart cities, featuring upgraded infrastructure and a variety of other amenities through public-private partnerships with Indian and foreign companies. USTDA is working closely on this initiative. In February 2016, the US Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Bruce Andrews, led a delegation of 18 American companies on a smart cities infrastructure business development mission. The delegation focused on systems, technologies, and services that can support sustainable growth of India's infrastructure, including safety and security, intelligent transportation, water, wastewater, and clean energy, among other sectors. The US private sector is partnering in the development of Ajmer, Visakhapatnam, and Allahabad. A consortium of US companies, AECOM, IBM, and KKMG, is preparing a blueprint for the Visakhapatnam smart city. In the railway sector, priority is being accorded to doubling or tripling train tracks in heavy traffic zones, modernization of 400 railway stations, technological upgradation of signal systems, instrumentation, and other safety measures. In fact, in railways, the government is also now focusing on how do you generate revenue through non-rail related activity, because railway stations, for example, in India are in prime property locations, and there is large footfall taking place through these railway stations. So how is that property, and through the development of that property, how can we use it to enhance revenues for the railways for further modernization of that sector? So that's something that the government is looking at, and the modernization of 400 railway stations is part of that program. 100% private investment is permitted in most segments of the railway infrastructure, such as suburban rail, metro rail, locomotives and rolling stock, manufacturing and maintenance, signaling and electric works, and dedicated freight lines. The Indian Railways plans to invest more than $140 billion in the coming 5 years and hopes to double this investment figures in the next 5-year cycle. US companies can, of course, participate in the modernization and upgradation of Indian railways. Looking at the broader context, US and India enjoy a close strategic relationship based on common values and aspirations. Trade and commercial relations form an important pillar of our vibrant and multifaceted partnership. The United States is now India's largest trading partner in goods and services, with a total trade of over $130 billion. Our leaders have set an ambitious target of increasing this figure to $500 billion. US investment in India increased from less than $8 billion in 2004 to $28 billion today. In fact, in the last 2 years, US equity investment in India has grown from $7 billion to $12 billion. India is also emerging as one of the fastest growing sources of FDI into the US. A survey last year of 100 Indian companies, and so there are about 200 Indian companies operating in the US. 100 responded to this survey, so it's only a partial figure. but a survey of these 100 Indian companies showed that they had invested $15 billion in the US economy over the last 5 years, with a presence in more than 40 states and creating 90,000 jobs directly. And of course, there would be also indirect job creation impact. 2 highly successful visits of the Indian Prime Minister to the US in 2014 and 15, and President Obama's visit to India last January have imparted a renewed momentum to the bilateral relationship. The Prime Minister's visit here in September 2015 highlighted the widespread interest among US industry in collaborating with India and participating in the flagship programs of Make in India, Digital India, Smart Cities, and Startup India. More than 50 CEOs from the top Fortune 500 companies met him in New York. And when there was an event focusing on digital infrastructure, digital technology on the West Coast, we got a clear sense that the most US leaders in this sector were heavily engaged with the Indian economy, and that Indian companies, Indian origin tech workers, Indian origin entrepreneurs were an integral part of the US leadership in innovation and in the digital technology space. At the B2B level, we are seeing increased engagement. USA was a partner country at the Technology Summit in November 2014 and at Vibrant Gujarat in 2015. Indian industry had a huge presence at the Select USA Summit in DC last year, and a large number of US companies participated in the Make in India Week in February this year. The US-India Business Council has said that its US member companies have indicated that they're looking at investing an additional $27 billion in India in the next 2 years. Several bilateral dialogues and joint working groups have met over the last 2 years to discuss ongoing and future collaborations in areas ranging from defense and military cooperation to trade, energy, health, education, science and technology. Recognizing the strategic significance of India-US commercial relations, the US-India strategic dialogue was elevated to a strategic and commercial dialogue during President Obama's visit to India in January 2015. The first US-India strategic and commercial dialogue was held in September last year. Both countries agreed to cooperate in a number of areas, including innovation and entrepreneurship, creation of sister innovation hubs, and facilitating an innovation forum in 2016. They also agreed to launch a joint work stream on ease of doing business and exchange information and best practices on cross-border trade, insolvency, and contract enforcement. Under the reconstituted and expanded CEO Forum, which met twice last year, US and Indian CEOs engaged in a substantive conversation about immediate policies that can encourage greater trade and investment, as well as the longer-term path to greater strategic economic collaboration, and presented their recommendations to officials on both sides. As an outcome of the high-level discussions, a US-India infrastructure collaboration platform has been established to deploy US technologies for meeting India's infrastructure needs and identify projects that might be of interest to US companies. A US-India investment initiative has also been set up to facilitate FDI, portfolio investment, capital market development, and financing of infrastructure. The US-India Partnership to Advance Clean Energy, PACE, has created avenues for joint research and deployment of clean energy resources such as solar, advanced biofuels, shale gas, smart grids. Future cooperation is planned in greening the grid, off-grid clean energy projects, and smart grids and energy storage. The Government of India has set an ambitious target of adding 175 gigawatt of renewable energy including 100 gigawatt of solar capacity by 2022. And we are looking forward to greater collaboration with the US in this sector, both for technology transfer and investments. Significant progress has also been made in defense sector cooperation. Traditionally, we've not been a buyer of defense products from the US. Yet in the last 5 years, we have contracted to buy almost $14 billion of defense supplies from the US. And in some of these equipment, for example, the C-17 aircraft, the largest number of C-17s outside the United States are now in India. But we have now decided to move beyond just a buyer-seller relationship to co-development of technologies and to co-production. Under the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, which was started in 2012, 6 Pathfinder projects were identified. 2 of these projects are significant, and if we are able to make progress on those, it will in a meaningful way transform the technology partnerships that we have in defense, and these deal with aircraft carrier technology and jet engine technology. As India continues to grow, the opportunities to do business with India are bound to multiply. At the same time, as with any expanding relationship, we will face challenges. The important thing would be to manage and address those challenges through dialogue and engagement, keeping in mind the bigger picture of convergence and partnership. Thank you. He is not allowed to ask a question. He's been my colleague in the service for many decades, but all right.
Thank you for overriding his objection. But a very beautiful elucidation of the Indian economy and India-US relations. I compliment you from my heart. It's very, very enjoyable listening to you, Arun. The question is that what you have said about the India-US relations. I just want all of us to reflect upon it a little bit. Commercially, going well. Not as well as it should be going, but going well. Defense-wise, other industries, other sectors, smart cities, good progress. Renewable energy, good progress. But ultimately for India, the construct is very different. And for US, the construct is very different. Culturally, psychologically, how we come to the table, what we bring to the table. Now this has been a sort of an issue for expanding our relations in a profound and substantive manner. The potential is immense. Even when I was dealing with the Americas desk in the ministry, I would see the fault lines. Culturally, we are very, very different in so many ways. Now, how do we sort of, if India-US relations have to become the defining relationship of the 21st century, which is the goal of the leaders, how does it become a goal for the countries, for the people? At people-to-people level also, good relationships are possible. But at the levels of bureaucracy, at the levels of systems, at the levels of understanding what each other expects of the other, what has to be given up by each side to bring that very substantive element of the relationship into existence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pradeep, for that very important question. So I would say first, I think there's a general recognition and articulation by leaders of both our countries that they see a lot of convergence in our national interests and a lot of convergence in our strategic concerns and needs. and they would like to encourage much more intensified habit of working together, dealing with issues. So if we look at general challenges that the world is facing, be it the challenge of terrorism, other aspects, there is a lot of convergence. Also, from the US perspective, if you look around the world, the two countries where you have maximum degree of multiculturalism, pluralism, if you look at aspects related to democracy, rule of law, the US sees India as a very important partner in terms of the message that is brought in the world, which is today challenged by exclusion, violence, terrorism. So again, there is a framework and a need for that partnership. And therefore, you see this happening in different areas. On the economic side, while there are clearly a lot of opportunities and a lot is happening, there will be challenges. And there will be challenges because the political economy of the US is very different from the political economy of India. Our geographic location is different. Our historical experience is different. With all the progress we have made, we face challenges such as certain number of people, almost 200 million, living below the poverty line. Almost 300 million people in India, even today, do not have access to commercial energy. Therefore, any path of development that we adopt, any strategy, we have to find a way of addressing the needs of these people. And because, for example, just availability of energy leads to better education, better healthcare, better empowerment, and is a contribution to the economic development process. Therefore, the governments in India have always talked of inclusive growth and development, and that is very important. So while we need to have high rates of growth to meet the challenges that I described for you, we also need to have inclusive growth. We need to make sure that the people at the bottom segments, at the income levels, are also able to benefit from this process. Aside from other factors, we are a democracy. The electorate of India is 830 million people. So if you take the electorate of the United States, the electorate of Europe, the electorate of Brazil, and the electorate of Indonesia, it doesn't add up to the electorate of India. So, and 70% voting we had in the last elections, where more than 570 million people voted. So people go out and vote. And if they feel they are not benefiting from the processes that they see around them, they will call for a change of government. And information in India is now easily available. We have more than 300 24/7 news channels. There are 1 billion mobile phone users in India. Smartphones will soon become the primary source of access to information and media. And I spoke to you about the rate at which people are coming online now. So therefore, in India, as we look at our economic policies, along with growth, inclusive growth will have to be very important. So there are some challenges. Therefore, sometimes we hear voices in the US challenging the issues related to local content that we try to promote in manufacturing, or challenges related to efforts we make for affordable healthcare. But we have to engage with that and try and convince our partners that the strategy that we had adopted is relevant, of course, for us, but also for others. And so that's the process we engaged in.
I'm Prokan Basu. I'm a faculty member in the Smith School. So thank you for all the information about the growth. I would like you to address India's initiatives in the field of sustainable growth, particularly the environment, and what is being done. As you know, this is one of the challenges in India. We have over 1 million people in an area which is 1/3 the size of United States. So sustainable growth is a concern for almost everyone. If you could address that issue.
Sure.
Thank you.
No, I think there is tremendous awareness in India about the challenge. But before I respond to that, I must put things a bit in context. You might have sort of heard or read that, when the British came to India in the 18th century, India's GDP was 20% of the global GDP. And when they left India in 1947, India's GDP was 2% of the global GDP. And the reason for that was that they prevented industrialization of India, because they wanted the British industry to provide goods for the Indian consumer and Indian raw materials to be used for British industry. As a result, we missed out completely on the Industrial Revolution. Now, one consequence of that was that we did not contribute to global warming. So we, of course, face the consequences of global warming and challenges posed by that. And therefore, so even today, our emissions at 2 tons per capita are far lower than the emissions of other countries. Now, in China, it's 7 to 8 tons per capita. In the United States, it's 14 tons per capita. Therefore, when we look at issues related to sustainable growth, this is an aspect that we do and need to keep in mind. That having been said, as I said, we are facing the consequences of global warming. There have been some disturbance to weather patterns. The temperature levels have been higher in the last few years than earlier. And therefore, the effort of the government is that as we seek to grow at 8 to 10%, which we need to do, given the challenges I described related to poverty, related to non-access to commercial energy, let us try and do it to the maximum extent possible on the basis of renewable energy. And that's why the government has set a target of 175 gigawatt of renewables, 100 gigawatt of solar. We have plans on nuclear. And in solar, for example, just to look at that, there's tremendous expansion happening. Last year, we had about 4 gigawatt of solar overall. And in 1 year, we've added 3.8 gigawatt of additional solar capacity. And the expectation is that in the coming year, we would add about 9 gigawatt of renewables, and a significant part of that would be solar. So the attempt in India is that let's focus on renewables, do a massive expansion in the renewable sector, and to see how we can use that to provide impetus to the growth that we need. So that's the broad effort. Now, I'm going to bar Indians and Indian origin people from asking questions. But Ritu, did you raise your hand? Yeah. So please, then I'll go down.
Thank you for taking my question. It's a simple one. So, two sectors in which India is in need of help but can also provide a lot of help are healthcare services and pharmaceuticals. So could you speak a little bit about what might be some of the opportunities that US businesses might have, and then how might the Indian government address some of the challenges we have in healthcare?
Mm-hmm. So on healthcare, of course, as most people would know, there are huge challenges in India. At one level, we have among the best hospitals in India. At one level, healthcare and surgery in India can be extremely cheap. For example, open heart surgery is about $2,000. Now, in the US or elsewhere, it would be several times that. But at the same time, the access to that in terms of needs is very limited. And for the poorer segment of society, access to affordable healthcare, while the government does provide that to a certain extent, again, there are challenges. There are all kinds of innovative things that happen in India. So Karan Bhatia is here from General Electric, and they've developed a ultrasound diagnostic kit in India, which you take from house to house rather than people having to come to the hospital. And it's about $50 for a whole set of tests that are needed. Which, based on their experience in India, it has been developed. Now it is being taken to Africa, Latin America, and other places. Then there is for example, cutting-edge cataract surgery facility in one of the states in India, where if you are rich, you pay. If you're poor, you don't pay. And it's a self-sustaining facility, no subsidies. And it's very simple. Everyone gets surgery free. Then you opt, after that, if you opt for air-conditioned accommodation, you pay several times the cost. And if you opt for non-air-conditioned boarding kind of accommodation, you don't pay. And then I found there's an ambulance service in India set up by somebody who did his MBA from the Harvard Business School, where again, the rich pay and the poor don't pay. And it's very simple. If somebody calls the ambulance and asks to be taken to a private hospital, you pay. If you ask to be taken to a government hospital, you don't pay. So there are ways in which, and so I think for the US companies, there will be a lot of opportunity with healthcare. in terms of equipment, in terms of technology partnerships, in terms of production in India. That's what we are looking at. In terms of pharmaceuticals, drugs, prices, I think I would like to see a more accommodating stance in the US, because in the US, as you know, the whole thrust as of now tends to be on incentivizing innovation, looking at aspects related to intellectual property in a narrow sense, and challenging issues related to generics manufacture. And in India, we have strengths in generics manufacture. And we believe through that, we are contributing to affordable healthcare, not just in India, but also on a global level. So this debate between what is the right balance between incentivizing innovation and affordable healthcare is a debate that all societies are having. That there's a debate within the US, there's a debate at a global level. And so I would hope that the debate moves a little more in the direction of affordable healthcare.
Hello, my name is Sunil with Earthopia. You touched on a very important point, which was inclusive growth. And India has about 2/3 of its population in rural. And you mentioned all the different initiatives going on in the smart city programs. What initiatives are happening in, quote, smart villages? And also, what is the resource allocation going in that direction?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and it's an important question. Again, with a lot of the issue has a lot of contradictions embedded in it. As you mentioned, almost 70% of our population still lives in rural areas and is still dependent on agriculture. But agriculture contributes only 14% of our GDP. And so again, it's very interesting. One of the figures I cite as a contrast is that, so 700 million people dependent on agriculture, agriculture contributing 14% of GDP. If you look at the IT sector in India, 3 million people are employed in IT, and it contributes 7% of our GDP. So you can see the difference in value addition, productivity. So obviously, we will have to spend a certain amount to revitalize the rural economy and agriculture. If you just look at the gross values and volumes of production in different categories, we top among the first few in the world. We rank there. But if you look at productivity, it is very, very low. So there is emphasis on trying to find ways to enhance productivity in agriculture, to put more resources in the rural sector. And if you look at this year's budget of the Government of India, there has been enhanced and tremendous allocation done for the rural economy. Again, food processing sector is something that we are emphasizing, because if we can generate manufacturing and employment in the rural sector using agro-based processing, again, that will have a major contribution.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lana Barnapolsky. I'm a second year MBA student at Smith. I appreciate you being here. One of the highlights of my time has been hearing distinguished speakers such as yourself that the university's enabled us to hear. My question is, I'd like to hear a little bit more about financial inclusion. I think technology and the way that you go about it, bringing the economy both to those disenfranchised and bringing those who are disenfranchised to the economy. So if you can comment more.
Thank you. So we had looked at two sort of mechanisms through which we promote financial inclusion and transparency, or I should say three. One is that in India now we have established what is called the unique identity document. Under that, about 1 billion people in India now have identity documents. And so they can be very specifically identified. We have also created, as I mentioned, 200 million new bank accounts for people. So it is a way for enabling them to participate more in the formal processes. And the third mechanism that the government is looking at, which was there earlier, but also now using the unique identity and the bank accounts, is microfinance. And different financial entities are being encouraged to do more of microfinancing. And we're already hearing that people are setting up small facilities in their houses, in the villages, and beginning to do things. And it's also a way of empowering people, including women. So certainly that is looked at.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for being here. I'm a second-year undergraduate student. My name is Amartya Sen. I wanted to get your insight into, as you mentioned, inclusive growth, but on the topic of young NRI and PIO students in the United States and how that can be tapped into or mobilized for entrepreneurship and innovation in the future for India-US relations.
So I think the students of Indian origin who are here, either Indian nationals or non-Indian nationals, but of Indian origin, have a unique opportunity to contribute to the India-US processes because they would have, let's say those are Indian students who just come here to study, they of course have an exposure and understanding of India. They would now have a better exposure and understanding of the United States and global processes. And therefore, as there is enhanced globalization of the Indian economy, they would be in a unique position to contribute to that. For example, some of our best hospitals in India were set up by people who worked here as doctors for many years and then went back to India. Some of our success stories in the IT sector were done by people who worked in the US and then went to India and set up those. So I think that provides an opportunity, and people should look at that opportunity, that how do they leverage that and bring in the additional dimension. Please.
Mr. Ambassador, you may have heard that there's a presidential election coming up. If you could vote, who would you vote for? And assuming you don't want to answer that question, what party, what thought process do you think has the best chance of promoting bilateral India-US relations?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So the first part of the question answer is very simple. Of course, I can't vote. So in any case, as a foreign diplomat accredited here, I can't comment on processes here. But I think it's an important question because now we find that there is a broad bipartisan support for the relationship with India. And the new relationship with India was, in a sense, started by President Clinton in 2000. When he went to India, and there was a very important message emanating from their programs of cooperation. President Bush took it to quite another level by saying that we would do a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with India. And this civil nuclear cooperation agreement with India has transformed the India-US relationship, because that was a signal from the US that it would now look at India differently. It will not see India as an object of technology denial regimes, but as a partner in technology. And I think once we did that agreement, our levels of technology partnership across a whole range of sectors, including defense, has expanded in a major way. And then after that, President Obama again took it, I would say, to yet another level. He is the first US president to have visited India twice in his tenure. He was there on our national day, the Republic Day. No US president has been to India on a national day. He has declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council, the first US president to have done that. And under his tenure, again, the economic partnership, technology partnership in different areas has expanded. And you may have seen reports in the media yesterday that the Speaker of the House has invited the Indian Prime Minister to address a joint session of Congress. And that, again, is a reflection of the broad bipartisan support in the US for India and for the India-US relationship. Please.
Mr. Ambassador, I was curious about what the Indian government is thinking about higher education, and specifically, as we all know, there's a handful of absolutely outstanding, stellar institutions, but once you go beyond that, there's a sharp drop.
Thank you. I think it's a very, very important observation. So at one level, as you mentioned, we have some top quality institutions, be it of technology, management, law, other areas. In fact, I was just commenting the other day that the CEOs of Microsoft, Google, and Adobe are all products of Indian Institutes of Technology. And they studied there for the first degree and then came to the US. And that's just one sample. But even now, only about 18% of Indians have access to higher education. And the government wants to take that figure to 30%. So we need to have a much larger number of top quality institutions, a much larger number of universities, colleges, and facility for university and higher level education. So the way this is being approached, aside from setting up more facilities within India, is to encourage partnerships. So I think partnerships between Indian universities, Indian institutions, US counterparts would be an opportunity. People can look at partnership cooperation in curricular development, course development, student exchanges, faculty exchanges. We will be short of faculty in India, so under one program, non-resident Indians teaching in foreign universities are being encouraged to go to India for a semester, a year, and make some contribution to our teaching needs there. So all those who are here, you said 2/3 of your faculty, for foreign faculty of Indian origin, so please encourage them to teach a semester in India. Don't give them increments unless they will do that. So we will need all these programs of cooperation, and the government is looking at doing it as comprehensive way as possible.